And you see how it is contrasted between this and between the people of Samaria, where she goes and speaks to. There is a 4-5 verses where the apostles are returning. John is very, very cunning. He has an art of writing. Very well, we could have had that she runs and goes and meets the people of the town of Samaria. No. Before she goes and meets, and then we know what happens. There are a bisection, a bypass, as we can say, of an encounter where the apostles are coming. And the apostles' encounter with the Lord reveals two things. The passage started, I don't know how many of you have ever heard. Very foolish for John to start this passage of Samaria saying like this. The passage says, now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus himself but his disciples who baptized, Jesus went away from Judah and entered the town of Samaria. Why this description? What is the need? The need is here. When the disciples come back bringing food, they see Jesus meeting a woman. They see Jesus asking water from a Samaritan, but they do not question. That does not mean they have no doubt in their faith. The passage begins saying Jesus knew that the people believed that he is baptizing more than the John. Whereas he knew that it was not he who was baptizing, but his disciples were baptizing. That means John is saying, unlike Mark, Matthew, Luke, that baptism was done after Jesus' resurrection. Here baptism was done by the disciples already in the presence of Jesus. In Matthew, Mark and Luke, we find Jesus emphatically mentioning his disciples, now go and proclaim, and in the name of Father, Son and the Holy Spirit baptize people of all nations. But here, while Jesus is living, in the beginning of the Gospel of John chapter 4, Jesus is saying, though he knew that it is not he baptizing but his disciples were baptizing. That means what? While Jesus was leaving, the disciples were already convinced, they have already learned from the Lord, and they are already proclaiming the Lord and baptizing in his name. They who were baptizing Jesus' name are now coming back, are filled with doubt, are filled with lack of faith, but not questioning. And that is put in contrast to the Samaritan woman. A woman who represents, idolizes a person who is full of imperfection, full of sin, unfaithfulness to the Lord, like the Samaritan town, unfaithful to the Lord. She is able to encounter the Lord and run for the work of evangelization. And whereas these men who are already doing the work of evangelization in the presence of the Lord have the lack of faith, and therefore asking, Lord, do you not need food to eat? My food is to do the will of God. And I am already satisfied because I have done the will of the Lord. Because I was never thirsty. I was never hungry, and therefore I sent you to bring food. I created the situation of me being thirsty. I created the situation of me wanting to get food, and therefore send you out because I was doing the will of God of bringing the Samaria back to me, or bringing the people of Shechem, the covenantal people, back to me. I was doing the will of God of bringing the unfaithful Samaria back to me in the person of the Samaritan woman. And therefore my thirst, my food is to do the will of the Lord, and I have done it, and I am satisfied.